So are you seeing my presenter notes or are you seeing my screen?
It's full screen mode, but with the two next slide. So maybe you can, instead of having two screens, you can
I've stopped them now.
Great.
Okay.
Yes, perfect.
So thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been very exciting to do this work. We did a structured expert judgment predicting prices out to April 22, and now this has given us the perfect opportunity to find out how we did. So the background of this is that I work a lot on household foods insecurity in high-income countries, including the UK. And in the UK, food prices or food price inflation is calculated by the Consumer Prices Index. So this categorizes foodstuffs into 10 different categories and gives them an index and compiles them in a sort of overall proportion in accordance to how people are purchasing them in the real world, and comes out with a monthly index of prices. So the background for this is integrating decision support systems, which Jim Smith and Manueli and I developed. And the idea here is, how do you network together inputs from disparate expert domains in a coherent way, taking account of inherent uncertainties so that different policy options can be compared in order to support decision making. And one of the applications has been in household food security. So we've had a paper out last year, earlier this year, in fact, in Series A, on how you would actually do this in real practice for UK using UK data. So what's the background of hunger in high-income countries? So 2008, we had the global recession, and for the first time, UK had food banks. They have been endemic in Canada and the USA, and I think Australia as well for a while, but they were a new thing in 2008 for the UK. And the largest network is the Trussell Trust, and they are very keen to have a demand-led demise of their organisation. They don't want food banks to become the norm or to become part of the welfare state. So in the UK, we've always had since the last World War, we had a welfare system. This was based on the premise that we're all in it together, the premise that none of us knows at any point where we're going to get too sick to work or whatever. This is brought into very sharp relief, of course, during the war. But in recent years, the narrative has changed so that welfare claimants are not seen as drawing on the insurance to which they have contributed, but rather they're seen as scroungers. There's been a lot of narrative around this and about why should those of us who are working hard kind of lift up and help those who are obviously scroungers and lazy and all the rest of it, which is not at all the reality. So the people who are on the front line of this is local city and county councils in the UK. The most severe budget cuts during the austerity measures were made to councils with the largest number of people living in poverty because of the way they decided to make them. So there are people who are living in poverty, who are in councils where there isn't much industry or employment. And because of the formula they use, those are the ones who got the hardest cuts. So back in 2016, the UK populace narrowly voted to relinquish membership of the European Union, and this is called Brexit. And with our work in food poverty, we knew this was likely to have an impact given the reliance of the UK on imports of food, and particularly from the EU. And this has been something because of the ease of trade, which had grown over the years. So, but how big are those price rises going to be was a very important question, because it also looked like incomes were not going to rise to keep pace. But policymakers are in a difficult situation because how much are they going to rise and how do we know? And therefore, how much resource can we justify applying to this? So we decided that we would actually look at structured expert judgment, because Brexit hadn't happened before. It really was the only way to go to get any kind of reasonable data on this, and to try and quantify by how much food prices were likely to rise, and therefore what that would do to the household budgets of the UK populace. And this was funded by Warwick's Food GRP, so thank you to them for the funding for the workshop. So Brexit should have taken place in March 2019, but then there was an extension. The deadline was extended to December 2020. We did the two elicitations. Firstly, when we believed it was still going to go ahead in March 2019, so this is 2018. At that time, we didn't know whether we were going to leave the EU with a deal or with a no deal, in other words, under World Trade Organization terms. So there was going to be either be a soft Brexit or a hard Brexit. We didn't know which it was. And so the first elicitation assumed these two possibilities. But that shouldn't say January 21. So later in 2020, we ran a fresh analysis to estimate prices under the new situation, which was we're leaving in December 2020, and there are three possibilities: a really hard Brexit, something which is just full World Trade Organization terms, something that's moderately disruptive, and something that's minimally disruptive, so more or less business as usual. And so we predicted 15 months out because we thought, well, there's going to be some disruption as things are going to settle back down. People are going to find new ways round. So we allowed for that. So we used Cook's protocol, also known as the classical model. We had 10 experts in food procurement, in retail, in agriculture, in economics, statistics, household food security. And so we used the 10 categories of food which are used by the government in the Consumer Prices Index. So the seed questions were derived from historic food price changes, and the quantities of interest were the future food price changes. So we did the usual thing. We had our discussion at the beginning to say, well, do the experts actually understand the questions, of course, and whether or not the questions we're asking are framed in the most helpful way for what we actually wanted to know. So here are the two scenarios from the first elicitation. So on the top, this is Uninet. So on the top, we have the minimally disruptive deal, so leaving the EU with a deal. And then on the bottom, we have a leaving without a deal. And we were able to use the power of Uninet to describe the correlations between the prices which were implied by the experts' opinions. So this was published in the BMJ Open. So we took a very much a public health kind of approach to this, and the updated one is published as a comment on this paper. So if you want to read the originals, do feel free to do that. So again, so coming back to June 2020, we realized that obviously Brexit was looking different from what we had thought. So we asked the experts to come back and say, what of the three scenarios, whether it's minimally disruptive, moderately disruptive, or full World Trade Organizations, they thought was going to be most likely outcome, because at that time we didn't know. And so we were able to use their estimates then as weights to think about what's the most likely outcome. So then, of course, we have our Uninets with the three scenarios. So A at the top, B in the middle, and C at the bottom. And on the right-hand side, these different weights for the different scenarios. So the baskets we use, so first of all, we use the Consumer Prices Index basket, which is kind of typical across the whole population. But we're also aware from a sort of food security point of view that not everybody will buy those things, and a family will have a different constitution of its regular shop, and a pensioner different again. And so we used research on those different baskets to do something with the constitution of that. So we actually calculate these three things because that would give the policymakers a better idea of what they were looking at in terms of price rises and any support that they might require. So summarizing, then we had 10 experts. We had 33 target questions and 13 seed questions. We had the random variables from the target questions. We also had the starting basket prices and also the calculation nodes. So what did we find? So this is a table showing us, there we go. So we've got the 10 different types of food category down the left. We've got the different weightings. They were received in April 22 in the first column and the third column in 2020. What was the index for this particular price. We have 2015 as 100 for all of these. This tells us how the prices have changed relative to 2015. And then we have the index difference, and this is expressed as a percentage change there. So just want to draw your attention to the fact that they're sort of around the sort of 5 to 10% mark, except for oils and fats, which are almost 20% change. So another big table, but I just want to draw your attention to, first of all, again, we've got the 4 different baskets. So we've got the index change of the basket, the cost projection on the CPI basket, the consumer prices index basket, and on the family basket and on the pensioner basket. Those are in 2, 3, and 4, rows 2, 3, and 4. So that's a price in British pounds. And so we can see what the difference was. And then on the end, Willie has very helpfully put us where in the which percentile they have matched in the distributions. And we see that again they're on the low end. So they're in the 10th, 8th, 9th, 10th percentile. So the prices overall in reality were less than the experts predicted, given the different likelihoods of the different scenarios. And then in the next section down, we've got scenario A. So this is the World Trade Agreement one, and then scenario B and scenario C. And what we can see there is actually scenario C was actually the one that came closest to the experts' actual predictions. And so that was kind of minimally disruptive. And then there's some plots here. So we've got the overall basket for the family food basket here. And you can see that on the plot, we've got it down in the 8th percentile, what actually happened. It's quite a narrow distribution. So we were expecting it to be, instead of being £103, we were expecting it to be something like £109. That's kind of how we did. We didn't do as well as we might have done, but we weren't way off. And so concentrating on scenario C, which is the minimally disruptive, how did we do? So again, we've got the different foodstuffs there. Bread, coffee, drinks, fish, fruit, meat, milk, oils, sugar, and vegetables. And we've got a mean in the first column and all the quantiles there. And then what actually happened in actuality in April 22, and whereabouts in the percentile, ranked percentile it was. And again, drawing your attention to oils, that one was in the 87th. That was very high compared to what most people predicted. And we've got meat down in the low end. That was very strongly predicted to rise very fast before Brexit happened. And it seems like it hasn't risen as fast as people expected. So again, looking at the oil in particular, we can see that it's actually up there in the 87th. For some reason, the oil prices rose a lot more than people had anticipated there. And we've got these 3 different scenarios of the actual inflation ranked percentiles relative to the elicitation projections for the 10 foods and 3 different scenarios. Then what if we say these 3 were the experts? We can have a look at their accuracy and their information. And we can see there that they all had the same accuracy, but C was least informative there. So what did we find? Looking at going back and asking the experts before we had shown them any results, before the results for April had come out, what do you think actually, which scenario do you think we actually got in the end? And of the 5 experts who replied, 2 couldn't call it, and everybody else thought the most likely was B, scenario B, the moderately disruptive scenario. the ones said it could well have been minimally disruptive, and others thought, well, actually, it's quite a lot disruptive. But what we find is that their estimate that what we actually got was a moderately disruptive Brexit isn't the same as the sort of, if you like, statistical accuracy that we got. And one comment that we had was that Brexit is a sovereignty belief system and not really about trade, though inevitably it has affected trade quite a lot, and in particular put in a lot of barriers. So just to conclude, and we could go back and explore the details much more in the questions if you would like to. So structured expert judgment was the only option for such a forecast. No past data would have been relevant to make any sort of prediction. So when we got the results, I did actually have a student help me compile a list of all the local councils and of post holders for equalities and sort of financial inclusion portfolio holders, and we emailed them the results directly with a sort of sentence or two, which we hoped was quite understandable for a lay person. We didn't get a response from most of them, though one or two of them came back and said, well, you don't know anything, and I don't know anything either about how the prices are going to behave. They completely rejected the idea that this was even possible. And then others would say, well, this is very worrying, but I don't know what we can do. So we didn't kind of have the impact we might have liked to have, but nevertheless, we did make it public as much as we could, so that people could prepare. So the minimally disruptive captured the price changes overall reasonably well, but the experts thought the Brexit we got was actually moderately disruptive. So some possible explanations for that. We haven't explored it with them yet, but perhaps they were overly pessimistic and predicted worse price rises. There was a lot of alarmism in the press, or where there are mitigating factors that have not been taken account, things they couldn't have forecast, or traders are fantastically creative about how they're going to get around various barriers. Perhaps they were more successful than we had expected. Or maybe the timescales are off. Maybe 15 months wasn't the right length of time. Maybe these price rises will materialize, but not yet. However, we now have the war in Ukraine. We have reduction in wheat supply, which is beginning to bite, and sanctions on Russia, which will include a reduction in significant portions of the world's production of fertilizer, which might then also not have knock-on effects in terms of productivity for the rest of the world that is still producing food. So the pure effects of Brexit will be harder to determine. So how did we do? Not perhaps as well as we might have liked, but certainly better than guessing. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Martine. I'll stop recording now.